Hello, hello. Welcome to Instagram Live. I'm ready to answer any questions, but also there's kind of some interesting news today, and I'm curious what people think of some of this new news. I'll wait for some people to arrive. Meanwhile, let me see. I just had a great interview yesterday with the founder of Kickstarter. Learned a lot. Tomorrow, I'm very excited. I'm interviewing Mark Cuban. If anyone has any questions for Mark Cuban, let me know. Jay's online. He'll take your questions, and I'll ask Mark Cuban tomorrow. I'm very excited about that podcast. And I'll also answer any questions you have now. Ask me here. Jay will take your question, put it on a link, email it to me, and I will start answering questions. But also, I think there's a lot of interesting things happening right now. Like, did you notice yesterday there was quietly very interesting news that nobody seemed to really pay attention to, but it got me really curious. So New York State canceled their primary. So this is more of an election thing than a virus thing, and I'm always interested in I'm never interested in the candidates that much, but I really like the game of elections and the game of politics. Ever since I was a kid, I was obsessed with elections. Like, I remember one time I would cut school every day, and I got this list. It's a paper list that they had to print up and send to me. I got this list from the Federal Election Commission of all the people running for president. It turns out there's a lot more people running for president than you think. There was maybe 100 different third parties. Now, they didn't expect to get any votes, but like, there was one guy, I think his name was, oh gosh, I even forget his name. But there was this one guy, his motto for his campaign was, "When in doubt, mumble." And he wasn't running for president, he was running for vice president because it was a useless job. But that was his motto, "When in doubt, mumble." I bet you if you Google that motto, you'll find out who it is. And he was running for vice president of the United States. He wanted Ted Kennedy to be the president. He was running for vice president. Then another guy, I would call each person up because they would have the phone numbers on their Federal Election Commission filings. And I was 12 years old. There was this guy he claimed to be the grandson of Chief Crazy Horse, and he was running on like the Native American Party. And there was another guy who's still kind of active. He's an active economist. His name was Norman Kurland, and his entire policy was he wanted all employees of companies to own shares in their company. So that was why he was running for president. And I don't know if he ever was bored of me or not. I would call him every day and just ask him questions. And I remember one time saying to him, I didn't know anything, I was 12 years old. I remember one time saying to this guy, "Oh, I thought Franklin Roosevelt was the best president." And he was like, "Oh, no, he was the worst president." And I'm like, "I don't know." And then he explained why, but I don't remember. And I just had this thing. And then I started calling people and saying, I worked for a local newspaper and I was a reporter, and can I interview you? So I started interviewing all these people, congressmen, senators, presidential candidates. And one time I got caught. I was calling this one senator, and his office called the newspaper, and the editor-in-chief of the newspaper called me. And here I am, I'm 12 years old. The editor-in-chief, my dad tells me, "Hey, so-and-so is on the line for you. Who's that?" And I knew who it was. It was the editor-in-chief of this newspaper. I was a paperboy for that newspaper. That's how I knew who the editor-in-chief was. I was delivering papers for them. And this guy just right away started yelling at me. He's like, "People get PhDs sometimes before they're reporters for this newspaper. You can't go around saying, you're 12 years old, you can't go around saying you're a reporter for this newspaper." And so whatever. And then I remember one time I called up Rex Scouten. So if you don't know who that was, he was the chief usher of the White House. And he said, "Why don't you come on down to D.C. and, come with your dad, and I'll give you a tour, you and your dad, a tour of the White House." So we go down to D.C., it's my birthday, and my dad warns me, "You better stop making all those phone calls," because at that time, it's different than from now. I was running up $600 a month in phone bills, which was like a lot of money. My dad would hit me every phone bill because he was like, that was, a substantial part of his paycheck was going so I could call the White House a couple times a day. And so we went down to the White House, and Rex Scouten took us to like where the living area, and we saw Jimmy Carter, Walter Mondale, like all these people who were high up in government. I didn't get to say hi to them, but we just saw them. But then eventually I lost interest in politics when I got interested in girls when I was 13, and that changed my life forever. But anyway, this is all a way of saying I really like the game of politics, and something happened yesterday that I thought was very interesting. So Andrew Cuomo said, we're not going to have a primary in New York. And there's always a good reason and a real reason. So always remember this. If you remember anything from this hour, there's always a good reason and a real reason. So if my daughter says to me, Daddy, can I go out and study at the library? I'm like, okay, why do you want to do that? Why don't you just study here? And she's like, well, I could focus in the library and there's some books I need in the library. That's a good reason. I can't argue with that. Honey, you go, girl, and study. But the real reason might be that all the boys are hanging out at the library. So, boom, she just wants to meet up with the guys. So Cuomo cancels the primary in New York for the Democratic election and for the Democratic primaries, the Democratic nomination. And he gives a very good reason. He says, well, it's not safe right now. We don't know when New York City's reopening. Well, why don't you postpone it? Or why don't you have mail-in? And he's like, don't even bother. Like, we know Biden, he said, we know Biden's the nominee. He's already clinched it. So and New York was just going to vote for him anyway. We're going to cancel the primary. Well, everybody kind of said, okay, that makes sense. Good reason. But there's a real reason. Think for a second what the real reason is. New York City has 324 delegates that it sends to the convention. Now those delegates are uncommitted. We didn't vote for any delegates. So they can go to the convention and vote for anyone they want. And guess what? Biden, he has all the delegates right now because every candidate has conceded. But there's still enough primaries left that Biden does not have the majority of the delegates. And the rules are you have to win the majority of the delegates at the convention. You need 1,900 delegates. Biden has 1,300 delegates. So let's say some other states act like New York. Let's say every other state acts like New York and says, oh yeah, we don't want to have a primary either. Biden's the winner. And they all do that. Then suddenly you're going to have a convention where Biden does not have the official nomination. And so it could be a brokered convention for the first time since, 1968. And that would be very interesting. And maybe Cuomo has in the back of his mind, maybe everybody will say, Andrew Cuomo, please be the Democratic nominee. Remember, Cuomo was the first one to say, we're not just postponing the primary, we're canceling it. We're not mailing in the votes, we're just canceling. And if every other state starts to do that, then Biden will not have the delegates to win the nomination. He'll still be the leader, but if he doesn't win on the first vote, then the convention is open. Then they start thinking, who could be, is it Michelle Obama? Is it Biden? Is it Andrew Cuomo? Is it some combination of that? Is it Kamala Harris? Is it Bernie Sanders? Is it Elizabeth Warren? Suddenly the convention is wide open. And I kind of have a feeling, two theories. One is, did Cuomo do this on first off, is this the real reason? And did Cuomo do this on purpose? Second question, did Cuomo do it because he secretly wants to be the nominee? Or third question, did all the big Democrats suddenly endorse Biden? Like, so Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, they've all just endorsed Biden only in the past few days. Did they all endorse Biden because secretly they're calling up all the governors and saying, listen, just like Governor Cuomo, we talked to Cuomo, he's good, cancel your primary, we're going to take over this nomination process. But we don't want Biden to be, we don't want him to guess, so we're all going to support him now, but just wink, wink, cancel your primary, we'll take it from there. So I don't know, of those three things, what do you think happened? I kind of think some combination between Cuomo secretly wanting to be the president himself and the Democrat machine being unsure about Biden. Because you always have to ask, and sorry I'm getting into the weeds on this election, but again, election dynamics is a great example of, there's always a good reason and there's a real reason. Because everything is fake. Once somebody starts running for president, nothing they say ever again is the truth. Nobody I'll take it back. I do legitimately think Bernie Sanders believes that this should be a communist country or whatever. But no one else believes what they say. Zero. Biden doesn't believe anything. Trump doesn't believe anything. They just want to get elected. They do tons of... did I tell you the story? One time, I was going to run for Congress. This was in upstate New York. I thought I had a chance. And this presidential candidate, this is a while ago, this presidential candidate, well-known senator, wanted to endorse me. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. But in order for him to endorse me, I had to hire his polling guy, his campaign guy's company. I had to spend all this money, basically that was going to go to him and his friends for him to endorse me. And then the polling guy had to poll my district to see what issues I should believe in. And I'm like, I don't need to know what issues I believe in. I already know what issues I believe in. I don't need people to tell me. If they like my issues, they'll vote for me. If they don't like my issues, they won't vote for me. And they're like, sorry, we can't endorse you. And then another person told me, you got to talk to this one judge or you're never going to get the nomination. And I'm like, why do I have to talk to a judge? Like, why can't I just talk to the people and they vote for me or not? And it's like, it doesn't work that way. So I ended up not running for Congress. But again, I don't believe what any politician says ever. So there's always something weird. Nobody believes in what they say. There's always something weird going on. So my theory is, and I've bet on this now on predicted.org, I'm betting that Biden will not get the nomination. I think that secretly the Democrats, the machine, doesn't want him, and they want someone else like a Cuomo or like a Michelle Obama or maybe someone brand new. I don't know. It's hard to take a candidate that's already lost, like an Elizabeth Warren or a Kamala Harris, but maybe they will. I have no idea. But it's going to be really interesting. I'm betting right now, and I put money on it, so I've got skin in the game, as Nassim Taleb, that, and again, this is a great study, and there's a good reason and there's a real reason. Cuomo gave the good reason, but the real reason is secretly behind the scenes, they're trying to move Biden out. Because you think about it, out of 60 million Democrats that we could have chosen, 60 million people are Democrats. Was Joseph Biden really the number one choice, the best Democrat on the planet to rule the entire world? I don't know. Who knows? Probably not. He seems to be I feel bad for him. He seems to be ill and should probably be taking care of his health. Plus, he's got allegations against him. Some people say those allegations are a lie. Some people say we should at least investigate them. I don't know. I'm not saying. It's kind of hypocrisy on both sides. And I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I was a Democrat all my life. Now I really am so disgusted with everything that I'm nothing. But again, my bet is that Biden will not get the nomination. And I put money on it on predicted.org. Second, Mark Cuban said he might consider a third-party run for president. That's when I reached out to him the other day and said, hey, come on my podcast. Who's coming on tomorrow? If you have any questions you want me to ask him, be happy to ask him. But that's just kind of the latest news in politics. By the way, also, when Hillary Clinton, this is a very interesting thing. When Hillary Clinton endorsed Biden, I think it was yesterday, she said, hey, don't put a good crisis to waste. Meaning, take this crisis we're in right now and use it for your political advantage. So she said it. She was quoting Rahm Emanuel, who said it, and everyone feels that's kind of Machiavellian to say such a thing. And she said it so publicly, almost as if she enjoyed this crisis. Now, again, I don't believe she enjoys this crisis. I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. But don't say it so publicly at the same time you're endorsing Biden. Let's put this crisis to work. That seems a little unfair to the people who are dying and who are sick and so on. But I understand the premise. If you take a crisis, it probably is a good campaign strategy to find the holes in how the person dealt with the crisis and make ads attacking them and so on. This is a strategy people have used for a long time. But I did some research. Do you know when someone first said that? Don't waste a good crisis. It actually was in 1976 in a medical journal where a physician, a scientist, said, don't waste a good crisis. But what he was talking about was, to his patients, if you have a medical crisis, view it as a wake-up call to be healthier. And so I just found that ironic that here we are in the middle of a medical crisis. The term now is used, the phrase is used for political reasons, but it came from this medical journal that was advising people to take a medical crisis and view it as a time to be healthier. So it's very interesting. And then on top of it, so then I wrote to Stephen Dummer, my friend who runs the co-wrote Freakonomics. He does the Freakonomics blog. And I told him about, where this quote came from. And he actually wrote back and said, no, I think it came from Machiavelli, the guy who wrote The Prince, who was all about conniving in politics and so on. So it comes full circle. But anyway, I thought that was interesting in Hillary's thing. By the way, Elon Musk tweeted a few hours ago, "Free America now." And he put it all in caps. And so again, the good reason is he thinks maybe the virus has peaked and we won't have that much damage if we open the economy, whatever. But what's the real reason? Well, maybe he needs his workers to show up at the factory. Tesla is one of those companies, one of those stocks that people buy on the dream and not on the reality. So General Motors, you kind of know what you're going to get when you buy General Motors. They're going to sell this many cars per year. They have this dividend. They have this profit margin. But Tesla's a little bit more of possibility. Oh, if I buy Tesla now, it's going to be the biggest car company in the world 10 years from now. So when you buy Tesla stock, and many stocks are like this. Some stocks you buy because of their earnings. Some stocks you buy because of the dream. And Elon Musk is the master of presenting the dream. So he needs people in the factories. If there's no cars being made, he's got no dream. So he needs people in the factories. So that could be the real reason that he says free America now. It means send people back to work. Another interesting news. Starbucks announced they expect to open 90% of their stores by June, which is interesting. But I still wonder, we got liquor stores are essential, marijuana stores are essential, now all the coffee places are going to be essential, but still you can't go to the the shoe store. You can't go to the flower store. You can't go to Verizon. Is there really a problem in Verizon with social distancing? Is there really a problem in a flower store with social distancing? Like, why aren't these small mom and pop businesses, these people, I walk around and I see they're not only out of business, their places are for rent. They're already gone. So these are people who have businesses for 30 or 40 years maybe, mom and pop. And we don't want to end that part of American history where all of a sudden all mom and pop are gone. I mean, let's play this out. Here, and I'm not trying to be depressing or anything. I'm not going to talk about deaths or this or that. Let's play this out to the end. What happens if the economy's closed? Let's just make it up. 5 years. Here's what happens is that these cities, these self-contained cities will form where everything is provided. Okay, and you'll work in around the clock in shifts, and you have to apply, just like you apply to Harvard, you have to apply to be in a city. And once you get accepted, you have to prove you're immune, you have to get regular vaccines or tests, and you're rotated through different jobs, and you're part of this city now. We're all in it together in the city. And all these cities, these kind of automated cities will pop up all over the country. And the government will sort of take control of everything. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I don't think it's something I would like, but I don't know. I sort of see, and I don't think that will happen because I think we're reopening the economy now. But if you took the extreme and said, let's not open the economy for another 6 years, then I see that as a possibility. So, by the way, another piece of news, the Gap just announced their big sale, 75% off all of their clothes. And when they say the word sale, again, there's a good reason and a real reason. The good reason is they're notifying you that something important is happening. It's a sale, and it's urgent. The sale might not last forever. But the real reason is their sweaters are no longer worth $100. No one will pay that. Their sweaters are worth $25. So all the people worried about hyperinflation, first, you have to recognize clothes are 75% off now at the Gap. That's deflation. That's massive, massive deflation. If you look at the economy right now, it's not like we're in a recession, because it's weird to say it's a recession. It's a mini depression. So the definition of depression is a really long and deep recession. So that's not what's going to happen either, because we're going to not have, Q3 and Q4, the economy is going to move up. It might not move up to the highs it was, but maybe it will by 2021, 2022. We're not going to have a depression. But we're having a mini depression this quarter where unemployment is at its worst ever, GDP growth is going to be at its most negative ever, deflation is at its worst ever. Like, here's what I'm hearing from real estate agents. It's not that you don't see on their websites that prices of houses are down, but the offers, real estate agents are telling me, the offers are down. Every offer is down, and some of those offers are being accepted. So again, if you just look on the real estate website, seems like business as usual. I get emails from real estate agents, oh, everything's going great. We're getting more offers than ever. The offers are coming in 30% lower than the price. They would normally never see that. And so there is deflation happening right now. So and it all brings back, well, first off, let me see if Jay has posted any questions. I'll start answering some questions using my computer. Kind of sick of the computer screen a little bit. Jay, thank you. Here is the link. I'm clicking on it. Going to IG Live. Thoughts on Remdesivir, the Gilead Pharma drug that's being used for coronavirus. One day it's good news, the next day it's bad news. Now today we have some good news about it. I don't know. The good news really is they're testing something like 40 drugs for coronavirus. This is amazing. There's so much technology we're doing now that you couldn't even do 10 years ago when swine flu was around or when MERS was around, which was another coronavirus. There's so much technology and in terms of genome sequencing, in terms of isolating. You know, we've done so much work on SARS and MERS, so we're kind of ready for coronavirus. I say we because for the past 23 years, I've been a PhD in biochemistry and an epidemiologist, but only on Twitter, but I can still comment as if I'm an expert. And I don't know what's going to happen with this drug, but the good news is we've got 40 drugs in development. I'm not as optimistic about vaccines as other people. You know, the coronavirus, the common cold is a coronavirus. I've said this before. We've been working on a vaccine for the common cold for 50 years. We haven't found one, and I don't know why there would be a vaccine for this one. I hope I'm wrong, but I do hope that there is medicine that helps alleviate severe symptoms from people who get it. Because when the elderly get severe symptoms, that's big trouble. So I don't trust that. But drugs, yes, let's do it. How do I decide on podcast guests? It's a really great question. It used to be, so every day I get emails from publicists. Oh, so-and-so has a book out. Oh, this movie star has a memoir out. Do you want to interview him? Oh, this actor is starring in a new movie. This writer is writing a new movie or a TV show. Do you want to interview them? And I would always feel like, oh my gosh, William Shatner? Of course, I'll interview them. So I always feel like I have to say yes. Now I am not saying yes to any of those people, and I'm not saying yes to anybody. What I'm doing is, what am I personally interested in? And I'm going to seek out a person I'm interested in that I have questions for and that I'm really curious about and have them on my podcast. So in the beginning, 2 months ago, in the beginning of news about coronavirus, I would have on epidemiologists. Then I had on healthcare policy officials. Then I had on economists and investors. Then I had on, more recently, how do you deal with stress and anxiety, and how do you start coming up with new business opportunities? Like I had on Carl Allen. How do you buy a small business coming out of this with as little money as possible? So I wanted to know, I was curious. I wanted to know the techniques. I wasn't just reading their book and then, oh, okay, it's William Shatner wrote a memoir. I better come up with some questions for him. I just really wanted to just meet William Shatner. I wasn't curious about him at all. And it was a horrible podcast, except for the fact that the physicist Michio Kaku also came on and we argued about the physics of the transporter. And Michio Kaku insisted the transporter was possible, and he explained it using physics. And William Shatner was like, that's just magic. And I said to Michio Kaku, but if you get into a transporter and then you end up in some other place, is that the real you, or did you die and an exact replica of you appeared? And he said, yeah, that's the only problem, is that it's you die, but the exact replica of you appears. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to use that transporter. That's the only thing I got out of that podcast. But now, like for instance, Mark Cuban's been doing a lot of interesting things during this coronavirus period. Like he's been paying his employees, he's been making interesting comments, and now he's even suggested he might run for president. So called him up, asked him if he wanted to come on the podcast. Coming on tomorrow. I'm very excited for it. It'll be right after my IG Live tomorrow. So, and someone asked a question about Mark Cuban. So I believe Mark Cuban is part of the President's Economic Recovery Committee. What is really going on with that effort? Great question. I will ask him. What's your opinion on objectivism? I know Mark Cuban is a big fan of Ayn Rand. So Ayn Rand, I used to work for a hedge fund manager who was obsessed with Ayn Rand. So everybody who worked for him basically read Ayn Rand. So I read The Fountainhead, I read Atlas Shrugged, and I do have to say, I liked the books, but not for the same reason everyone else seems to like those books. Everyone else seems to associate her and her philosophy with being a conservative Republican or whatever. What those books are about, and they're really brilliant books if you view them in this light, they're about how do you be a competent person and why it's very important to be competent and essentially to choose yourself and not wait for other people to choose you. If you wait for other people to choose you, you ultimately, you become sort of a version of a slave, and you're just waiting for this other gatekeeper to determine the conditions of your slavery. If you choose yourself, if you're competent and you can blaze your own path, and it takes a while to develop those skills, then you truly have a fulfilling life, I think. You still have ups and downs, you still have crisis, you still have bad things happen, but at least you're not beholden to any one person for your happiness and your well-being. Remember, I said this the other day, well-being is a function of your freedom, your community, and mastery. So freedom is how many decisions, how great a percentage of your decisions are you making today because this is what you want to do as opposed to what others want you to do. And that even includes family. Like, it's great to support and love and do the things that are good for your family, but you still have to do things that are good for you. You can't sacrifice all of your time to your loved ones or to your boss or to your professors or to your parents or to your friends. You have to make a certain percentage of decisions per day that are for you, and that's freedom. Community means, how much, do you have people, do you spend time with people who love you, who you love, and everybody's looking out for each other's best interests, friends or family or whatever. And remember, it's not always the case that the family you're born with is the family you die with. So, or the family you even transition to. So, back in the 2000s, I always had lots of business partners that I didn't really like. And I always found that I was fake whenever I spoke to them. Like, I would call them up like, oh, how you doing? How's your kids? How's this? How's that? And I didn't give a shit. Like, I didn't care. But I wanted something from them. And so it was very transactional, and I would pretend to be their friends. And that's not community. That's not friendship. And I found at the end, whenever I spent time with these people or a long time with them, I would be really unhappy with myself. I would be stressed out and depressed. And it was only when I made it a very strong commitment, I'm only going to spend time with people who I really respect and love, and hopefully they respect and love me back, then my life became so much better. So when I started focusing on freedom, my life became better. When I started focusing on community, my life became better. And by the way, that even happens now. Like, sometimes I'll be friends with somebody, and it's been happening to me a lot this quarantine. I'll realize, I was only friends with them because I respected them, and I wanted them to respect me. I wanted them to validate me. But I find during this quarantine, even those people I don't care about spending time with, because validation's okay, but you have to really care about the people in your community. And I realized, I thought I was cared about them, but I realized I just wanted validation. So sometimes it's subtle and you don't always know, but I realize for whatever reason now, there's a lot of people out there that I was just concerned about their validation, and because I thought they were smart or I respected them in some hierarchy, and now I just don't care anymore. Like, this time has helped me with that. So freedom, community, and then mastery, improving skills. So writing down 10 ideas a day helps with mastery. There's all sorts of techniques that help with mastery. and I write about them in my next book, but I'll be giving them you don't have to buy the book, I'll be giving them here in these IG Lives. And one thing I found that's really important for all of these things is being vulnerable. So I'm going to answer some more questions, but I'll just tell you a quick story. In 2002, I was dead broke. I've written about this before, but I didn't write about this one aspect. I was losing my home because I was living right next to 9/11. I couldn't pay for my home anymore. I had no money in the bank. I couldn't pay the mortgage, couldn't pay the IRS. Just everything was going wrong. And so I put up my house for sale, and I put an ad in the newspaper. In the New York Times, I put an ad for my house. And a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, came up to me and said, "James, are you selling your house? I saw an ad in the paper for it." And I said, "No, I'm not. Where did you see it? I'm not selling my house. How did you see that? That must have been a mistake." And he's like looking at me because someone had to pay money for the ad. Someone had to take the photos of my apartment. Someone had to come up with a description of the apartment and list the price. I did all those things. It was clear I was lying. He knew I was lying. I knew I was lying. He was a good friend even, but at least in how I thought about friendship then. But I was so ashamed to admit I was broke or having a problem or selling my house. I was so ashamed because I thought my whole identity, I felt my self-worth was my net worth. And so that all these people would stop liking me if I didn't have enough net worth. And by the way, that was true. They all did stop liking me, and I was correct, but I was incorrect to be ashamed. And so what shame does and what fear like that does is it prevents you from, it makes you a slave also. So I was slave to the concept of me having this house. I was a slave to the concept of my friend thinking that I was rich or a genius or whatever. Like I was slave to all these ideas. And then it took like another 8 years before I started being very vulnerable and just open. I finally was like, I can't handle it anymore. I can't handle having no opportunities, fake friends, a fake life. I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I started being very open in my writing, and I realized suddenly I was free. Like the more vulnerable I was, and not gratuitously vulnerable, like I wouldn't say, "Oh, today I have hemorrhoids, blah, blah, blah." I wouldn't say that, but I was just vulnerable about the things that previously I'd been ashamed about, the things where I'd been afraid of what people think about me. And I started being vulnerable about that, and suddenly I was free. And then nobody could take anything from me. Nobody could say to me, like, "Hey, I think I trust you, but are you broke? Or are you the kind of person who gets broke?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I've written about it 1,000 times. You're not telling me anything new." I was suddenly free to say whatever I wanted and not have to hide myself. And ironically, I had more business opportunities than ever. In fact, all the money I've made since I've been able to keep, and I've had so many opportunities that it's been unbelievable. So this really, by the way, not all the money I have kept, I've lost money too, but it was such a relief to be vulnerable and authentic, as authentic as I could. Like it's always an ongoing process where you learn more, you dig deeper and deeper. But the catchphrase is vulnerability equals freedom. And then finally, again, mastery. You get good at skills, and vulnerability helped me get good at writing, and writing became this enormous skill for me. I've been writing since 1990, almost every single day. But starting around 2010, I started being more vulnerable in my writing. After 20 years, my writing just shot up in both skill and audience. And now looking back on it, I think I was even a horrible writer then. But, I think it's been matured since then. But at the very least, people responded to this vulnerability. And it's always part of the process of mastery to admit where you don't know something. And it's okay to not know or to not have something. So, for instance, a few years ago, many of you might know, or some of you might know, I threw away all of my belongings, and I only had a carry-on bag. I don't have the carry-on bag in this room. I only had a carry-on bag. And so the carry-on bag had 2 t-shirts, 2 pairs of pants, a button-down shirt, maybe I wore a jacket, I had a computer in there, I had a phone. I didn't have any books. I would use the Kindle app on my phone to read, and that was basically it. And if I needed a toothbrush, I'd go to the store. And I would just go on Airbnb, so I didn't have to buy any furniture. I didn't have to buy towels. every 3 or 4 days, I'd be in a new Airbnb or staying at a friend's house or, sometimes staying in a hotel. But mostly every 3 or 4 days, sometimes a week, I would move to a different Airbnb. And I stayed in some nice places. I stayed in some really bad places. I realized it didn't matter. And what was really interesting is people sometimes ask me, oh, that must have felt really freeing for you. And it did, but the biggest thing that it did for me was, it wasn't like minimalism. The biggest thing that it did for me is, imagine when you first move into a new area and you wake up the next day, you've only been there one night, and you wake up and you say to yourself, I'm just gonna walk around and I'm gonna explore, and everything's new. Like, oh, that looks like a cute restaurant. Maybe that's where I'm gonna do my laundry. Oh, maybe that's where I'm gonna go bowling or play pinball or go to the bookstore. That's my local bookstore now. That's my local cafe where I could work. So every 3 or 4 days when I was in a new Airbnb, I had that same feeling of excitement in the morning that I was going to wake up and explore and be curious. And that curiosity really taught me a lot about myself and about the people around me and about the people who owned the places I was staying in. Like, I was just constantly curious, and that really helped me in terms of like my idea muscle, and it just felt good. Like when you're curious like that, when you're exploring like that, it's a real big dopamine boost. So I was always very happy and energetic in the morning. And then at the end of the day, I didn't have a home to settle down in. But again, I'd go back to this Airbnb. It was brand new for me. And I would just sit there, and it would just be like, it was like I was living someone else's life, which is sometimes is an interesting break. It's like it's like almost like a kind of meditation. Like when you meditate, part of the idea is you're no longer yourself. You're kind of yourself without the labels. And that's how I felt just sitting in these Airbnbs. I didn't need to meditate because I suddenly felt like disconnected from my past and even my future. I felt just very much in this unusual adventure that I was living. And then, of course, at some point, a friend of mine called me and said, James, no woman is going to go out with you. This is kind of creepy. You need to get an apartment. And it just so happened I needed an apartment for other reasons, and I got an apartment. I've been renting an apartment. I've been renting this apartment ever since. But so that was the story about shame. Somebody's asking, actually, will Airbnb survive? I think it will. Because here's the thing. It's not like, I don't know if Airbnb in New York City will survive. Like, who wants to come to New York City? But everybody I've spoken to in the past few days, they all want to move out of New York City. And, I've talked about 3 or 4 friends, and they're all like, ugh, we're moving out of the city after this is over. And I get it, because nobody wants to be at ground zero all the time. New York City is like an angry, bitter place. Like the other day, I walked outside, and it was before the law or the rule about masks, and some woman yelled at me, you got to wear a mask. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't have one. I'm going to buy one right now. She's like, well, you can't go outside without wearing a mask. And I said, I'm sorry. And I was polite, but it kind of stuck with me. But if someone asks, oh, this is a good question. If housing prices drop 40%, would you buy a house? No. Because if housing prices drop 40%, other things will be down 40%. And I'd rather invest in a business that I think is going to have a huge return and have that be down 40% than a house. But that said, I probably think it's probably a good idea to be a real estate agent, for instance, if house prices drop 40%, because other people will start buying. Any advice on going through a divorce while coming out of the pandemic? Yeah, particularly if you're isolated, you're in quarantine with your wife right now. Try, and if you have kids, or even if you don't have kids, it's very important. You have your whole life. Life is short. And if you're going to spend a year of your life having an angry divorce, then you just ruined a good percentage of your life. You're not going to get another chance. You're not going to get, whether you're 28 years old or 45 years old, you're never going to have that year back. You could lose all of your money, and I have lost all of my money in divorce, but you can make money back. You're never going to ever get that year back. And that year is really, really important. Like, let's say you're 45, and let's say you have a 5-year-old. Okay, you're only going to have 13 more Thanksgivings with that 5-year-old before they go off to college. Just 13. Are you going to spend 2 of those Thanksgivings, 2 out of the 13, angry and bitter and upset at your wife? So what if she wants a certain amount of money? Be abundant. Give to her or work out a fair deal. And then you'll make the money back. People make money back. There's a lot of stimulus money out there. There's good, if you Wayne Gretzky says, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck's going. Well, the stimulus money is going into the economy. Start to skate there. Get divorced. My last divorce, I basically gave all of my money to somebody because I knew that I was feeling inflow of abundance, and I was because I was writing 10 ideas a day down every day. I was coming up with nonstop business ideas, and I knew people were already interested in my business ideas, and all those business ideas many of them have been working out. So I've managed to survive. So I don't know. The most important thing when going through a device, lawyers will say, oh, well, hide your money or do this or do that. Just stand up straight, have this feeling of abundance, and that's how you're going to have the best possible outcome from your marriage. Nothing else. So, can I give an example of my 10 ideas list? Well, I've been thinking of, I have a list here, but maybe this is a better list. I was looking at Coursera today. So I love these online learning platforms. There's Coursera, Skillshare, Teachable, Highbrow, LinkedIn Learning, Khan Academy, Code Academy. It's on and on. And I think there's lots of opportunities to create an online class, and you could do it and help people. And so Teachable, I was an investor in, and they actually just sold 3 weeks ago. So I know this industry is exploding. And Coursera just announced today that their business is the best. They just had the best month ever. So I made, if I teach an investing class, I picked, here's the lessons. 10 lessons I would teach in an investing class, the basics of investing, the secrets of value investing, growth investing, what I call piggyback investing, arbitrage, derivatives, real estate, investing in private or venture capital companies, how to understand risk, whether you're investing in a stock or you're playing a hand of poker. Risk is very important to understand what risk really means. A lot of people think if you take a lot of risk, you make a lot of money. A lot of people think entrepreneurship is all about risk. A lot of people think switching careers is very risky. A lot of people think switching a career to stand-up comedy is very risky. None of those things are risky. The key is, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, before you launch to be an entrepreneur, take out the best entrepreneurs remove risk. The best entrepreneurs remove as much risk as possible. Larry Page and Sergey Brin started Google. They didn't quit grad school. They were students at Stanford. They didn't quit grad school for a year after they launched Google because they removed risk. The best entrepreneurs always remove risk. And then I have a class lesson, my personal checklist for investing, and I teach about that. So I'm thinking of doing an investing class, but that was just a list. It might be a bad idea list. I don't know. But let me tell you an example about removing risk. So a friend of mine, very talented friend of mine, is doing something where she's tie-dyeing clothes, like everything from sweatshirts to shorts to jackets to whatever. And, she has very strict requirements on the materials. And she's spending all her time finding these materials. And she's spending days and days researching factories and manufacturers and where do I find these materials? Where do I find these materials? And I said, why don't you just get cheaper materials and from China? And she's like, well, that won't be the final product. And I'm like, so? It'll still look good in a photo, and then you could see if people want to buy it. And then I suggested, but you know what? You don't even have to do that. Just make 4 Facebook ads with the different products and use a $100 budget and put them on Facebook. And she said, but I don't have a website. What are people going to click to? And I said, it doesn't matter. They'll click to nothing. But you'll be able to see in the Facebook Ads Manager how many clicks each ad got. And then you'll finally know if your product is something people want. So instead of spending 6 months making the perfect product, you can really just do an experiment to test the product. And so that's how you remove risk. You do little experiments. And my next book is all about how, the book that I just finished, is all about how to create these little experiments so that you learn, you improve, and you remove risk from any field that you want to master and get good in, whether it's a business you're starting or a skill you're learning, or you want to go from being a secretary to being an actress or an actor in Hollywood, or you want to go to stand-up comedy, or you want to write a novel. There's always ways to experiment, and the key of a good experiment is little downside, huge upside, and zero chance of failure. Because even if you fail, even if nobody clicks on these Facebook ads and no one wants your product, you just learned how to test for any idea by using these Facebook ads. You just learned how to make Facebook ads, and so on. You always learn something with an experiment. So do people feel embarrassed when listening to your vulnerable stories? My mom was embarrassed hearing my vulnerable stories. She no longer talks to me. My older sister, was embarrassed listening to my vulnerable stories. She no longer talks to me. And in fact, I'm very proud of my sister. On Valentine's Day, she had an article. She's always been a writer, but she was never published, and she's 9 years older than me. She had an article on Valentine's Day in the Modern Love section of the New York Times, and it was a beautiful article. And I haven't spoken to her in years. She hasn't spoken to me. And I sent her an email. Hey, that was a really great article. It was really beautiful. We should get together sometime. She did not respond. So that always makes me sad. But yes, sometimes people feel funny hearing when my stories are a little too vulnerable. I always make sure I don't hurt anyone else. I'm the only one I hurt in my story. I never hurt anyone else. But she thought my stories about my dad were a little too much for her, so she doesn't talk to me anymore. And, again, there's a good reason and a real reason. Who knows what the real reason is? So this question is, James, can you talk a bit about your time consulting on Billions and what you think sets that show apart from the pack? That's a really great question. So two really good writers, Brian Koppelman and David Levine, they're really great at writing. They have a writer's room with like 9 other writers in it. And then those writers, here's how it would work. Though each writer had a different episode that they would write. And then they would send, before, during, and after, they would tell me their idea for the episode. Then they would write the episode. Well, they would ask me if it was a good idea. And then while they were writing the episode, they would ask, how can we make this a little bit more criminal, but a little bit more gray area? I was kind of the expert on how to make these hedge fund situations that Axe was in realistic, criminal, but gray area. So couldn't quite tell if it was criminal. And so they would ask me, and I would come up with scenarios, and they were like, okay, that's good, that one. And they would write the script, and then afterwards I would read through, and I would make notes. I even would rewrite dialogue if I thought it was unrealistic, and I'm probably the only one other than the main writers who spent time on every single script. And then the script would go off to Brian and David, and they would do a final rewrite, and it would be a massive rewrite. And I think what makes Billions so special is just the enormous amount of research. Like, those guys sat down with like 50 hedge fund manager billionaires before they wrote it. And then they spent a lot of time with me, there's another guy, Turney Duff, who was a consultant before me. He was season 1, season 2, I was season 3, Josh Brown was season 4. They would spend a lot of time with us, and Turney and I, and specifically, we had run hedge funds. Josh is more of a stockbroker, but Brian and David would sit down with us and say, hey, what's it like in this scenario? What's it like in this scenario? And some situations were unrealistic. Like, I'll give you an example. In season 3, I think it was even the first episode, there was a tsunami off the coast of Rio de Janeiro. And Axe had some holdings there, and what was he going to do? Well, I was able to, first off, I told them it's impossible, just in terms of land structure, because this is how much knowledge you have to have as a hedge fund manager. Just in terms of land structure, it's impossible for there to be a tsunami that hits Brazil. There's no such thing. You can't have a tsunami on Brazil. But let's say you had some sort of thing called a micro tsunami or some other storm. So what I did was I called a friend of mine who was a hedge fund manager in Rio de Janeiro, and I probably spent 20 hours on the phone with him, just going over every scenario. And so that kind of level of research and work, combined with their writing and their skills of creating a plot, I myself learned so much about how to create a plot that will last, a plot for a season and a plot for an episode. They were masters of creating the plot for an episode and having every episode had surprises and surprises within surprises. So I learned so much because I spent 6 months working on this. And then, when I showed up at set, I would see how the actors acted, and I learned so much. But again, the level of research that went into every single scene and every line of dialogue was very impressive. And also, I think the dichotomy of Axe versus, the Paul Giamatti lawyer character, the hedge fund character and the lawyer character, and the fact that it was hard to tell who was evil and who was good, that dichotomy is so fascinating. Because don't forget, in television, just think of all the successful shows where the hero is a bad guy. The Sopranos, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. I'm trying to think of some other ones. But there were so many shows from that period, and I'll throw Billions into that. There's so many shows where the heroes are actually bad people. And so taking that dynamic and moving it one step further, where it's this conflict between two equally drawn characters, but they're both sort of bad, but they're both have goodness in them, that was very interesting, and I think it made Billions different. What do you think of the future of chemistry post-COVID? Well, I think dentistry. People need dentists. Do you know that the leading cause of suicide in the 1800s was dental pain? Most people don't know that. The leading cause of suicide in the 1800s. I mean, imagine when you've had your worst pain before a root canal. I remember one time I was on a plane and I started something, I had a huge pain. I wrote 30 emails to my dentist, just going on and on with capital letters, describing in detail how significant my pain was. And so I landed, and then I went straight to the dentist's office, and all the nurses, receptionists, they were all cracking up reading my emails when I walked in, because that's how much dental pain is. So there's always going to be... So in 1913, don't ask me how I know this. 1913, the first school for dentistry opened. It was a school for oral hygiene. And after that, there was... By the way, the Federal Reserve started that year as well. So, coincidence? I don't know. But after that, there was fewer suicides because less dental pain. And, of course, right now, dentists are a large part of the opioid crisis, which I'm very thankful for, actually. So, when this is over, will you be doing a live podcast again? Yeah. And, I think, just like we've been doing these Instagram lives, I've been debating taking some of these Instagram lives and putting them in a podcast, but I'm not doing it yet. And then tomorrow morning, my wife and I have been doing an experiment. Around 8 or 9 a.m., we start up, and we've been doing a show. If you go to SB, Sam Barry Television Vision, sbtv.com, SBT as in Tom, V as in Victor.com, we've been putting up a kind of an experiment, a mini show called Not Your Morning Show. So I kind of think all the morning shows you see, like Good Morning America, the Today Show, they're all BS and it's all scripted and teleprompter, and even all the news shows, there's all these teleprompters. No one's giving you a real interpretation of the news. So we're doing like a half hour of Not Your Morning Show where we give our own interpretation of the news. And I think tomorrow I'm going to experiment with doing it on TikTok Live at about 8 a.m. So now I'll say it for sure officially. On 8 a.m. tomorrow on TikTok Live, I'll be doing Not Your Morning Show, which will be me analyzing the overnight news and giving my own interpretation of it. So you can check that out. But I'll always experiment with the podcast. And, someone asked earlier, how do I pick podcast guests? Again, it's only the ones I'm really curious about. So if when the coronavirus started, I had on an epidemiologist. Then I had on an economist. What's going to happen next? And, now I have on Mark Cuban. Later I'll have on, my good friend AJ Jacobs is doing a new book, and I'm going to talk to him about his book. Maria Konnikova, such a great writer. She, a year and a half ago, she started off not knowing the rules of poker at all, and then she got so good at poker, she made $250,000. She wrote a book about the process, so she's going to come. I'm so interested in what happened. Her book's coming out in June, so I'm going to interview her over the next month, and she's a great poker player now. We play poker occasionally. Great poker player. Her coach actually lives in this building, Eric Seidel. He's the greatest poker player of all time in terms of cash winnings. So it's going to be... So those are people I'm really interested in, as opposed to just taking the latest celebrity. how to know when to quit a project. I was just thinking about that today because, oh, you know what? I have a few minutes still. How do you know when to quit a project? So I was talking to my friend Stephen Dumner today. We used to have a podcast. So he wrote Freakonomics, and then we used to do a podcast together called Question of the Day. We did like 150 episodes, and it was really fun. I enjoyed seeing him. We would do 3 episodes a week, and I enjoyed seeing him. I enjoyed doing it. But then at some point, after like 100 episodes, we both sort of realized at the same time, we're just kind of asking the same questions over and over again, and it's not as fun. We're not really learning anything. So this is very important. I don't know if I have the time to say it. This is very important. When to say yes and when to say no. And this is completely related to that. You know what? I'm going to save this for tomorrow. So tomorrow I'm going to talk about when to say yes and when to say no. I also meant to talk about some business ideas I think would be interesting for people, but I'll talk about that tomorrow. Maybe I'll even whip out another book challenge, although I want to hear how you guys are doing on your book challenge. I also realized I missed some questions here. So tomorrow, Jay, please remind me, this is the perfect formula for when do you say yes and when do you say no, and how to say no and how to say yes. It's great, and it's a chapter in my next book, but I'm happy to talk about it here. And business ideas. There's other stuff I've been thinking about of sharing. So tomorrow I'm gonna definitely share this on my IG stories today. I hope you watched the IG stories. Yesterday, for some reason, it didn't show up on my IG stories. I'm gonna make sure it shows up today. And if you don't catch it on IG stories, I am gonna put it on YouTube later this evening. So look for it on YouTube. Today's IG live, and tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I'm gonna do a TikTok live that's called Not Your Morning Show, and it's my account on TikTok is James Altucher, so you have to follow me there, and then you'll see my TikTok live. But it's kind of my own version of a news show, which is very different from the news shows that you see on any television channel. So thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you liked it. I always like feedback on Twitter or emails or Instagram or whatever. Tomorrow also I'm interviewing Mark Cuban right after the IG Live. So if you have questions for Mark Cuban, ask me on the IG Live. Don't ask on Twitter because then he'll be too prepared. So see you tomorrow, 2 p.m. Instagram Live or 8 a.m. TikTok Live for Not Your Morning Show. See you later. Or you can find me on YouTube with this video later tonight, probably by 8 p.m. Or you can find this on the IG stories on the live button. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming to these, and I appreciate it. Thanks.